Hi everyone and welcome to this episode of Keeping It Real. In this episode, Aarti and I are going to be talking about self-sabotage. I know, the moment I said self-sabotage, many of you just perked up because a lot of us know that self-sabotage is wrong. We accept that we shouldn't be doing it. But here's the tricky thing. It's not easy because most of the times we are not even aware that we are doing it because they're all deep-seated patterns and we are so used to those patterns we don't even recognize them as patterns, right? It's just like the way of life. And I'll give you some examples. Think of this athlete who's like overtrained and injured herself. And then she says, you know, I injured myself, otherwise I would have won that medal. Think of the little boy who doesn't prepare for his exams. He just keeps delaying, procrastinating. He keeps procrastinating and then he doesn't do well in the exams, obviously. And what does he say? Oh, I didn't study. That's why I didn't do well, right? These are all some of the examples of self-sabotaging. But the trick is we are not aware that we are sabotaging ourselves. So then how do we deal with it? How we deal with it is looking at why are we doing this. Correct, Aarti?
Exactly. And you know, there are so many patterns, which is why the topic is so important for us to understand. Because some of these things we've just taken it as part of life. Because this is how I lead life and this is what I believe. So let's go through quickly the patterns. So when I talk about self-sabotaging patterns, we have 9 that we're going to talk about. And the first one is typically when I don't feel good enough or I don't have, my self-worth is not in place and I'm feeling incomplete in some way. And that is like the first thing that pushes people into self-sabotage. And I think you have like a classic example for that one.
So I was in an equation where the other person was not very confident of their position in the relationship. And we all want reassurances, right? There's nothing wrong in asking for reassurances. But it came to a stage when there was an excessive request for reassurance. So the first time when you say, you still care for me, no? And then your heart melts and you say, of course I care for you. How can you think? You still love me, no? Of course I love you. So the first few times when it happens, it is okay. It's nice because reassuring someone about about how special they are to you is a nice thing. But when it happens once too often, then it starts kind of pushing you away. Because the way I felt was, after some time, I started saying, yeah, of course. Oh, for heaven's sake. Then you come to that. And then you just don't want anything to do with that person because there is too much reassurance being asked for. And now I realize that maybe I could have been kinder. But the point is, it was self-sabotaging behavior from the other side because they did not feel worthy enough to be in this equation, and by excessive request for reassurance actually had the opposite effect.
They actually push people away, and this is exactly how parents sometimes, they feel inadequate in their parenting role, and they tend to over parent or overprotect, over nurture, and this pushes the child away saying, oh my god, my mother's here. You know, those typical helicopter moms as they call them, or the snowplow moms, the ones that remove all the obstacles and then expect the child to sort of go through that. And this is like a classical self-sabotage pattern. Yes, and it comes from low self-worth. The base in that is low self-worth. I don't feel good enough.
So I overcompensate.
And if I were to take this, pardon?
Yes,
you overcompensate because of that. Yes, exactly. And the second pattern, the most common pattern, fear of failure. And everybody can relate to that. And there's this beautiful saying that goes, failure may never harm you, but fear of failure can kill you. You know, because failure in itself is actually quite a savior. It helps you access a lot of resources within you. But that example that you started out with, where the student doesn't study, procrastinates, that's a typical example of fear of failure, because it's almost like, if I don't start,
I'm not going to fail.
I won't fail.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I can give you a lot of examples, especially from Asian cultures, where people don't start out businesses because astrology has told them that this is not the right time for you. And the real belief system that we need to sort of incorporate is, there is no moment like now. If I believe that this is the moment I have, I can give it my best. I will learn through the process, but fearing failure and as a result not starting something is the second self-sabotage pattern.
Correct. Okay?
And if I were to go to the third one, you have a classic example for this one. the inability to prioritize.
Oh, yes.
And this is the person that, overdoes things for other people, but doesn't prioritize the self. And do you want to explain that? Because you gave me a beautiful example for it.
No, because I know someone who does incredible work, who helps a lot of people, right? But that person puts himself last, which means that he's having less sleep. There's not enough time for his health. There's not enough time for his me time, because all the time he's working. He's making an incredible difference. Definitely. But I feel that light is dimming because you haven't allowed yourself to charge and you haven't made yourself a priority. I have seen this happen.
Right. I have another beautiful example for that, Anu, and that's actually more subtle than most other patterns. There is this person I know. He's a very, very genuine, gentle person, and all through his life, he has allowed his wife to study, and I'm using the word allowed his wife to because that's how he says, I allowed her to study, I've allowed her to do her PhD, I've allowed her to do this, and the whole reason when he came for therapy much later, he said, I've allowed her to do all this, but I've given up on all my dreams. And this is the inability to prioritize. And that's a typical pattern of self-sabotage that I see in a lot of people.
Yeah.
And when you introduce self-sabotage, you talked about how these patterns are unaware. But what is more dangerous is that I'm not only unaware of it, I also give it narratives like, this is sacrifice, this is love.
Yes.
Or this is, something that is very important. Or I even give things like, I'm very content, I'm spiritual, I've given up my material longings, or I've given up, I'm very content with what I have. There is so much joy in giving. And I'm giving from an empty cup. What will I give? What will I give when it's an empty cup? And so that imbalance is what makes it self-sabotage, right? And so if I were to go to the fourth pattern, the lack of role models would be what I would bring in. And we've spoken about our dads quite often. And my dad was a very, very beautiful being in that sense that, he served people. I have a lot of respect for what he's done for people. But what I also learned from him subconsciously was that you should be working, otherwise you're wasting time. Right? It made me a workaholic. To the point that I burnt myself out very early. My first burnout happened when I was less than 27. I started working at 23, and at 27, I had like the biggest burnout. I no longer wanted to see people. I was like, enough is enough. And the point was that my self-sabotage pattern was so learnt from my own father, because he was also somebody who had worked himself to the bone, worked his fingers to the bone, and had never once complained about it because his dad was the same. And it had come down generations as a pattern that if you're not working, if you're not serving the poor, if you're not serving people, you're wasting your life. And that's a typical pattern.
No, I've had something very similar happen in my life. So when I was 35, I was broke, right? I had no money, and I remember I was ashamed that I had to borrow from my dad for my daily expenses. And that really bothered me. And I said, at 35, you should be an independent person and you're like borrowing. So I started working really hard. And I worked so hard. And I think that was self-sabotage, because I would work here in Madras. I'd work out in the morning in YMCA. When you remember, we used to work out there.
We met at that time.
Yeah. I used to work really hard. Then I'll film the whole day. I'll take the night flight, go to Hyderabad, work out in the morning, film the whole day in Hyderabad, come back from Hyderabad, go straight to the dubbing, and I worked at this pace. Why? Because I was so afraid of being broke. It did have one good thing, because I think I made myself financially secure because of that kind of hard work. But you know what happened? At one point, my body just gave up. It just collapsed. And I had a physical breakdown, not a mental breakdown, a physical breakdown, because I had a temperature of 104 with no known cause. Nobody could figure out what it was. The body just said, enough, I've had it. That I think is also a self-sabotage, isn't it?
Yes, very much. And we don't, and that's a beautiful point you brought up, because self-sabotage always peeps up and says, listen, I'm sabotaging you, pay attention to me, but we never take note of it.
Yeah.
And you know, before my breakdown, my burnout, it would always come up as anxiety. It would come up as, you know, I don't want to go to work today. And it was not from laziness.
Yeah.
It was a clear warning that, you know, you need to prioritize yourself and take care of yourself. This is not how you can lead your life. Mine was spine injuries, and I'm sure you know, because I was recovering from the first spine injury at that time when we met. So mine would always be a spine injury, and I would, you know, push myself after that. I had numbness in my leg, I couldn't walk, but I would still say, no, I can do this, I should be serving people. And the tsunami happened around that time. With that spine injury, I was on the coast helping children. And these are all patterns. I mean, when you look at it externally, they look like amazing things that people have done, that, you know, we've been very strong. But believe me, we've actually done grave injustice.
I used to say a disservice to the self. I think it's a disservice to the self, isn't it?
Yes, because, you know, Lao Tzu says you cannot pour from an empty cup. You need to be full, and only then the giving will be genuine. Otherwise, there will always be an imbalance.
I'm a martyr.
Exactly.
And also, Aarti, when you say I'm a martyr and I've done so much for you, it doesn't make the receiver feel any good.
It actually makes them feel very small. It makes them feel very small. You know, these things of I did this for you, it's absolute nonsense. You know, if you've done something, you've just done something. I didn't do it for you. You know, these narratives that have been built into the social fabric that we live in sometimes are so misleading, and they're the ones that maintain and sustain self-sabotage. Because I'm so scared to step out and say, listen, I think I no longer want to do this. And then you're like, oh, what happens to that persona that you have that talks about you being this
noble,
service-minded person, or this martyr, or this warrior, or something like that. And that's where the most dangerous pattern comes in, because I'm unwilling to grow because I'd rather have the cocoon. You know, and sometimes the cocoon that can nourish the being that's there is no longer the one that can nourish the one that has the wings.
It becomes your cage.
Why would I stop? Yes, it becomes the cage for the person that has the wings. And that's where self-sabotage becomes such a dangerous pattern.
Yes.
And I'll move into the next pattern quickly, because I'm sure as we're saying this, many people are like, oh, I have all 4. So wait, we have 9. I'm sure you have all 9. So we'll go to the next one, which is deeper insecurities that we try to meet. And I can give you, you know, examples of people who have chronic illnesses, and when they recover from some small thing, next illness comes up, because they believe I need to be ill to make people take care of me. I can't take care of myself, someone else has to take care of me. And how is that possible? Only if I'm ill.
Not only that, it is also, I feel sometimes, that I won't get the attention and affection unless I'm in danger. So I put myself in danger.
The person who's dealing with deeper insecurities is somebody who always is creating a smoke screen, never letting you see the fire, you know, and never letting you put out the fire. And that's really the dangerous pattern of self-sabotage that we need to be aware of. And they crop up as illnesses, they crop up as relationship problems, they crop up as people who are unable to work in teams. You know, because this person is always creating new smoke screens for you. And that can be any of these things that we discussed.
And one thing I'd like to add, Aarti, is that these self-sabotaging patterns are all, in one form or another, we have done it in our life. I have done it in my life. You know, at some time or another, I have done this. And one pattern that I recently discovered, I wanted to tell you, which was, I actually spoke about it as a coping mechanism. But it is actually not that. Okay, so this was when I spoke about how I deal with difficult situations. And I very calmly said, oh, that's because I look at the worst case scenario, and then I look at how do I cope in case the worst case scenario comes, and I'm fine. But actually, if you look deeper, I have a pattern of thought. Okay, there's a thunder. It's going to be a huge storm and the building is going to fall. So it goes from one ordinary incident to a catastrophe, which is a possibility. So what happened is I had identified this, and I realized that it was distressing me, and I knew that it was self-sabotage. And I mean, in retrospect, it seems so clear, but I didn't realize that's what I was doing. But I fixed it. You know how? I said, okay, bring it on. This is the worst case scenario, right? Fine. If this worst case scenario happens, then this is what I will do. And that calmed me down. And over a period of time, you know what happened? That self-sabotaging behavior actually turned out to be one of my biggest strengths, because I mitigated the effect of that self-sabotage behavior and instead used it to strengthen my confidence.
Right, and there's a beautiful part that you brought up here. Most self-sabotaging patterns at some point in our life were beneficial. They were required. They were required for me at that point to cope with. And you beautifully mentioned how it's a coping mechanism. So I needed it at that point as a younger child or as a teenager or something to deal with a particular set of situations. But I started keeping it as my comfort zone, because then it kept me there and it prevented me from moving forward or growing further. And that is where, when you identify that this is the pattern and you want to move on, it brings in so many resources for you. And your beautiful pattern here is where I would also quote Princeton University's intelligent fast failure. And their innovation studies talk about how when you really want to make great innovations and you start here, make sure that you make as many intelligent fast failures as you can. Catastrophizing, making sure that you already are ready for the worst case scenario. Because if you're already ready for all the worst case scenarios possible, then there's nothing that can prevent you here, but you're also learning right through the process. As opposed to the original school of thought, which believed avoid failure at any cost. And that is probably the most dangerous, because the brain doesn't learn when there isn't any failure. And that's a beautiful example that you brought in there. But one of the most subtle self-sabotaging patterns, and probably something that people miss out, I have it, you have it. So one of the most subtle patterns and something that is easily missed out is fear of success. Both of us have it, in fact. And, if you look at it, both of us are quite introverted. Nobody will believe that about us. In fact, that's probably why we click so much. Because, when we meet, a lot of our meetings are actually in silence. Right? Yeah. We don't actually go up and, speak a lot and stuff like that. But for me, my biggest fear is, if I accept all the success that's coming to me, I will have to people a lot more.
Yes.
And I can't handle it.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, what is peopling? According to Aarti, peopling is when she has to deal with people. So she goes and talks to a lot of people, then it's like she's peopled out.
Yes, exactly. And what will happen? And then people are like, you should come home. And I'm already struggling with peopling. Accepting an invitation to go to somebody's house is probably the most stressful for me.
Yeah.
So sometimes I actually underplay my skills, underplay what I can do, because I can't handle the repercussions of what will happen if I become...
No, I do the same thing.
Right, I know. In fact, there was a beautiful talk by Brené Brown where she says that, after her first TED talk, she thought 1,000 people would see her. But ultimately, I think some 40 million people saw the talk. And she said, it was such a weird thing. She said, I actually wanted to break into the TED office and steal the tape so that it wouldn't be put up online. And she said, I was fearing this moment when I had to actually be who I am. And for me, the self-sabotaging pattern also, I'll have like this extremely successful run, and then for a whole year after that, I will hide. I will hibernate, because that is my self-sabotaging pattern. Playing it the way I want to play it, fearing success, has been the most dangerous pattern of self-sabotage for me. And I think we work well together because of that. Because, I would look at the number of likes and I'm like, oh my God, more people are liking it, so I have to people more. And it's so scary for me. I know, we're probably letting out the cat out of the bag more than we expected.
No, for me, what happened is, I know I'm digressing, but I must mention this. So pre-lockdown, the number of people who were following my page were X. During lockdown and after lockdown, or wherever we are now, it's now 2x. Okay? I'm not quite sure I'm happy about it. Because for me, it's all about personal contact. If it's a smaller group, it's easier for me to deal with.
Yeah.
In a larger group, it puts me under too much stress, because I'm trying to answer everybody. I'm trying to make sure no one is offended. I'm like saying, actually, I don't want it. No. So, everybody, can you go back to work now?
There's a difference between your wall and my wall. Mine, no responses to any of the answers. Yours, everything has a response. Because that itself is peopling for me. And it's very, very stressful. But I have a very scientific reason for it. Extroverts, function with dopamine. It's the pleasure seeker. So they like human contact. Introverts like you and me function on acetylcholine. Acetylcholine cannot handle so many people. So once I got the scientific explanation, I was like, okay, me trying to avoid success is quite okay because my brain probably feels overwhelmed by it. But it's also a sabotaging behavior because it generalizes across situations. It may be okay for certain situations to protect myself, but when I use it overall, I actually cut myself from a lot of opportunities that may actually be beneficial for me and very important for me. And that's where this is. And of course, the next pattern that I have is your
the latest
one that,
discovery.
You told me about, and I coined the name.
Yes.
Yes. So, Little White Lies.
I have to.
So Anu is going to explain it because it's her pattern.
So this is a pattern that I discovered very, very recently, and very recently meaning this morning when I was preparing for this call, because both Aarti and I decided that okay, let's look into ourselves and identify what patterns of self-sabotage we've had in the past. So when I was doing that, suddenly it was almost like a bolt from the blue, right? Because I lost Amma and Appa in 2017, and for 2 years I just did no physical activity because obviously I'm trying to cope with the grief of loss and all of that, and I was okay with it. I was conscious that that is not a priority. Fitness is not a priority. Mental well-being is a priority. It was okay. But as I was slowly recovering, my brain started telling me, hey, it's time to get fit again, because basically you like being strong and fit, so let's start. And what I would do is from 2018, so end 2019, beginning, I started my workout. And I do workout because what I was doing was, I would have a plan and then I'd go do that workout. That will have an X number of reps, say 10 reps. I won't do 10 reps. I'll do only 7 reps, right? I'll do 7 reps. It's doable. And I would say, enough. 7 reps I've done, which is better than doing nothing, no. And I've done it. Now I move on. Now what has happened? I haven't worked out to the intensity that I'm supposed to have. Fast forward to that evening. Then I will eat something that is really rubbish food or high calorie. And what will I tell myself? Tomorrow I'm going to work out. This morning also I worked out. It's okay. You've always been someone who ate, in a healthy way. You are working out. And as a result, what happened was, I thought I was working out. I thought I was eating sensibly. But as the months went by, I was nowhere close to being fit, because all along I'd been telling myself little lies, little white lies about, oh, so many reps is still very good for you. So what I discover is that months have gone by and there has been no improvement on my fitness. There is no improvement on strength. I'm beginning to feel a little demotivated and I have no idea what's happening. But then I come back to India and I go regularly. Lockdown happens and I'm focusing on what needs to be done. And then I realize that I'm sticking to what needs to be done, sticking to the intensity that should be, intensity of the workouts. And I've seen the results. I've seen results. And in retrospect, I realized what has gone wrong. What has gone wrong is during those times, I was just telling myself little white lies. Yes, you're working out. Actually, you're not. Yes, you did a very good workout. Actually, you didn't. Yes, you can eat this and you can eat one more. Actually, you shouldn't, because you've not burnt those calories. So you actually have been telling yourself little white lies, but those white lies keep piling up and become a big problem in you achieving what you want to achieve. The moment I stopped those white lies, truth was the antidote to that self-sabotaging behavior. And I am seeing the results and I'm really happy about it.
Not just you, I think everybody's tuning into your workout videos, right? So the last pattern, I'll end with that and then we'll probably move to change, is past blame, present righteousness.
Oh, yes.
So all of us have had difficult childhoods or points in our life that were very, very stressful. Some people use this as a launch pad, a stepping stone to get better, to develop themselves. Many people like to use it as a badge of honor.
Or a shield.
You had an example, yes, as a shield.
Yes.
I think you had a lovely example that you
No,
probably
I've had
share.
people, I've had people who have actually spoken about how they are not able to achieve their potential, how they are not the wonderful person that they can be because this happened to them. Now, this incident that they're talking about, what had happened to them, is something that had happened about 10-15 years ago, right? And in my mind, and believe me, I've done this as well. So I've done this as well. You know, I wasn't able to do this because that happened. And then someone pointed it out and said, why are you holding that up as a shield or a badge of honor? It's not an achievement. It is an event that has happened. And that's an event in the past. It remains in the past. Don't say, oh, it is because of that happened. That is why I'm like this. Otherwise, I would have been something else. But, so in a righteous way, I explain my own drawbacks, which are actually a function of me sabotaging myself by holding on to that.
Exactly. And this is where, even in therapy, sometimes we have people coming in. Yes, healing takes time, healing takes intention, healing is very important. However, what will happen is when people are unaware of self-sabotaging patterns, they're unable to cooperate in therapy as well. And you know, each time they come in and then they try to do something. So this is where, when we started off, you mentioned how sabotaging behaviors are very things that we're not aware of. The most obvious ways of self-sabotage are addictive behaviors. So if you look at it, people who use substance abuse and all of that. But now, in more recent times, one of the most common forms of abuse, most common forms of self-sabotage and addiction are in addiction to social media. So what happens, I have like this uncomfortable feeling that has emerged in me because of something triggered it off. And then I don't know what to do. So I go and do a motivational talk, like I'm listening to something motivational. Right? And then otherwise I'm watching some useless nonsense, something entertaining, some 10 seconds or something, I post something, whatever, like I'm doing something, I'm watching cookery video, whatever, it doesn't matter. But the point is, I took my focus away from what needs work here and I put it somewhere else. And for the next probably 2-3 hours, I'm fine. And this is the classical one where people say, ma'am, I'm only watching motivational videos. Okay, you may be watching only motivational videos, I understand, but did it motivate you?
No, I think there is a term I read about some time ago. They are the self-helpaholics.
Oh, wow, I love that.
I read it somewhere. I said, like, constantly you're looking up at self-help thing, how to improve myself. Okay, you're looking that. How does it make you feel? And what have you done about it? That is the more crucial question to ask, isn't it?
And that's also one of the ways in which, you know, when somebody calls up and says, you know, I'm having difficulty or something, and I would tell them, why don't you just try 2 or 3 sessions of therapy with somebody locally in your own city, because I don't do online work. They'll say, no, it's not so serious that I need therapy. I just want to chat with you. Because what happens is, like when you're just chatting with someone, they'll give you like a quick fix, no? Like, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? And then they'll go, because they already have a deeper seated self-sabotage, they'll try this, it won't work. Because, you know, the cause is somewhere else and you're trying to do something here. It's like, you know, these anger management techniques like count to 10 and all that. If you don't deal with the trigger of the anger, what's the point in counting to 10?
Did you know that, you remember they used to tell us earlier that if you get very angry, punch something or yell into a pillow, they've now found that that is actually making it worse. That it actually makes you behave in a violent manner because you are getting used to it.
Because you're ending the neural pathway, triggers off, and then it ends with violence. So you're actually training your brain to end something with violence, and very dangerous. In fact, Anu, I was somebody who was suspended from school for aggression, for punching people and all that.
I was a bully when I was in my first standard.
Yeah, I was good, very good. High five.
High five.
Right. So I was somebody who was suspended from school for violence. And I remember my principal was very sensitive, empathetic lady, and she would call me into her office and she would say, think about what you did. And I remember closing my eyes and thinking about how I should have punched better or aimed better, you know. Seriously, because
you nasty little child.
I am, and I'm not going to wear it as a badge of honor. I've figured out how to deal with my anger, and now, you know, it's much better. But what I'm trying to bring people's focus to is that when it comes to addictive behaviors and when we want quick fix solutions, that itself is actually pushing our healing away from self-sabotaging patterns. Because what I'm trying to do is getting somebody else to give me a solution for something that only I can figure out. Right? At most, somebody can say, maybe this will work for you, but I need to do that work, and if I don't do that, I'm going to miss out quite a bit.
And you're constantly holding up something. Yes, see, life is not fair, okay? Bad things happen. But the point is, if you're going to keep track of all the bad things and keep them in front of you as a shield, then you're also not allowing the good things to happen to you. Because that shield is not going to let the good things happen. No, and right. I also want
to
that's
a beautiful analogy, Anu, because in psychology we always say when you repress or when you suppress negative emotions, and I don't believe there are negative positive, but when you say you suppress sadness, anger and all that, you also suppress joy and happiness. Because what you do is you build this, you don't become vulnerable enough to allow joy and happiness to touch you. You don't see the beauty of a dewdrop, or you don't see the beauty of a bird that's on a tree, or even just the moment of, your child smiling at you. You miss out all of that.
And it's a very simple thing. Because you're afraid of losing people, you don't love them. What a sad way to live life. I'd rather
Such a paradox.
I'd rather love and feel the incredible pain of loss than not having felt that beautiful joy of love. Isn't it?
Exactly.
No, and I also wanted to make one disclaimer, because I think a lot of the questions that people have in their mind is, when you talk about something and you're laughing about your own patterns, okay? I want people to understand, we are laughing about it because we've sorted it. We've gone through it, we have disseminated it. When the serious work needed to be done, it's been done. Now we can talk about it lightheartedly. It doesn't mean...
I can talk about many times Anu and I have actually broken down in front of each other and teared up and cried and all about the same things. And now when we laugh about it, it's coming from a place of, I now know that, whatever came to hurt me probably left a scar, but that's no longer going to limit me. It's going to tell me that whatever came to destroy me was not strong enough. I emerged much stronger, and I think that's where this laughter sort of comes in.
It is true.
Really that.
So now that we've seen about 9 patterns, some of which that we ourselves have discovered and coined, right? And it's amazing. And I'm sure there are several more patterns out there, right? Which people will keep identifying it. Now what?
If there are 1 billion people, I'm sure there are 1 billion patterns.
Because, I'm
sure. We are so good at sabotaging ourselves. So I'm sure there are so many patterns.
Yeah. So now that we know at least some of the patterns, that is not where the journey stops, isn't it? The journey has to move forward. Then what?
So this is where I would urge us to move towards a 4-step plan. Because many people who have asked us about the other episodes we've had, what do I do about it? So the first is, I would ask you to do what is called a life review, right? So go back on your life and see, where is it that I'm repeatedly getting stuck? And these are always repeated patterns. So am I always coming up to the last part of, achievement and then, not making that one bit across the finish line? Or is it that, I'm always getting into a relationship and then, somewhere either I leave or the other person leaves. So what is it, that repeated pattern? In which aspect of my life do I see that pattern? Is the first area of identification. Because what happens is, the life review always gives us insight into how repeated this pattern is.
Yeah. And actually, Aarti, there was a very small way of doing it. Correct me if this might be useful. And I read it on Psychology Today, and there's a psychologist who says one of the things that she tells her, the people who come to her for a consultation, is that she says, get in touch with your thoughts. She says, if you felt a negative emotion, go back to the thought behind it and document it, and keep documenting it. Over a period, you will find there is a pattern. Then you address the pattern. Do you think this makes sense?
So this is one of the ways to do it, through thoughts, but I'm someone who believes and relies a lot more on emotional states. So what we would do is not just focus on the thought, that's one way. The other way to do it is to go into the emotional state that triggers you. So, to choose something that triggers you off repeatedly. So I'm feeling very anxious the moment I think about an exam. So I go into that state and then connect to similar experience.
When else did I feel the same?
Yes, because you'll notice that it's not limited to the examination. It would be in any performance related area. And emotions are like steps, so at each step, that's an intensity. And there would be in that intensity several incidents that are sort of encoded in the brain. and then there'll be another level, and then so we assume they're all anger, but they're all different completely when it comes to the way they've been embedded in our mind. And which is why I said go back to the repeated patterns, and that's very, very important. It's very, very important. So the life review is first at that level. Becoming aware is the first step. The second step is where I need to examine my beliefs and emotions. So the step that I would work on is understanding, because if I don't understand it, it doesn't make sense. It'll just be a pattern. So the simplest way that this would happen is to check your internal dialogue. What is it that you're telling yourself?
Exactly.
When you're reaching something, when you are in a relationship, when you are in a pattern, what is it you're saying? And I used to know this child who will say, you're never going to get this right. Because he was always told, you're never going to get this right. In fact, 2 days back, a musician friend of mine called and he said, Aarti, I think I really need help. And I said, what is it? So he says, I always believe that I'm never destined for the good things. I've played at Wembley, I've played here, I've played there, I've played in some of the best concerts, but I still believe that good things can never come to me. And so what are these beliefs that you have about yourself?
When I was doing a program in Coimbatore, in one of the colleges there, I used a video, and it was a very powerful video. This is an English video that was done by a lady in the US. She gets these 3-4 women to come across to her house, and she's just kind of interviewing them. She says, what are the worst things that you tell yourself, right? And the lady actually laughs, and she says, I tell myself I'm a lazy slob, that I never do work. I tell myself I'm like really hopeless when it comes to keeping a clean house, and that I'm just terrible. She says, okay. Then she picks up the childhood photograph of the same lady and she shows it to her. And she says, can you say that to her? Every lady who has come in, and they've all said bad things about themselves to themselves, every one of them, when they see that their own childhood picture, tears up and says, how can I? I can't. And the question is, if you can't tell it to your younger self, why are you being so cruel to yourself now? Because saying that I will never make it, I am useless, it is self-sabotage, but it is also cruel.
Such a beautiful video. And also I think this critical voice is something we pick up as we're growing up. We've had either adults in our life, like teachers, parents, whoever, who've told us that. I remember I was at one point called a thief, and I hadn't done anything. It was not even something that I had done. In fact, I was so hurt. It was by my 6th standard teacher, and I was so hurt that even today I apologize to people even when I'm asking to use their things. Such deep voices are heard within our mind, sometimes. And that's why that understanding is very important. And you can imagine, I've worked on myself for so many years, but that one voice was so critical, so judgmental, that it still hurts. And that's where some of our beliefs emerge. So if we are being critical now, it was actually self-preservatory in some ways. It's telling you, listen, you were humiliated so badly back then, so let me be so critical now to protect you from doing that. And which is why I said many of our sabotage patterns come actually from a very protective space, but I don't need that protection now. I probably needed it at that time, but I don't need it now, which is why it's so important for us to become aware of it. The third area which I would work on is acceptance. And what happens is, when this is where I would ask us to look at any situation that's presenting itself as sabotage. I want you to ask yourself, are these genuinely your needs for your life? Or are these somebody else's expectations or voices that you're living? So for example, when you want to start a business, or when you want to achieve something, or when you want to be able to work in a relationship, are you working with your expectations, your voice, your needs, or are you working because somebody else said it has to be this way? Because if you're doing that, you're going to sabotage it. And unless you get in touch with your own needs or your own real self, that's going to be very tough. And this is where I am enough, I am complete, I am whole. These beliefs need to be made internalized. And I'm saying, I'm using it this way because I have to internalize them. They are not already there as part of the blueprint. I've allowed for messages and comparisons and experiences to distort that. I need to consciously believe that I am complete. And by that, Anu, I'm not meaning that, I'm going to be so stuck and stubborn that, I'm this and I'm perfect.
No, that's what we were talking yesterday, right? You have to come from a place of intellectual humility. I was reading an article on intellectual humility, and they were saying that people who are intellectually humble are actually a little more open, and to the fact that they may not be right, that what they know may not be the complete picture. So if I am happy with the way I am, but I'm happy from a space of intellectual humility, I'm also aware of the places where I can improve. It's just that it removes
and there is always scope for improvement.
Yes,
the analogy that I would use is of a tree. Just because the tree has n number of leaves, it doesn't say, okay, I'm complete, I'll stop. It'll still find new ways to, branch out.
No, you told me a beautiful example of a tree also, which I don't know whether it would be relevant to this one. You said, just because the tree is just growing here and you see it, don't forget that it's also growing the roots and it's going deeper.
Yeah, I did discuss it with you. Yes, I forgot that.
Beautiful one.
So yeah, the tree is growing in so many directions, right? And so I could be growing internally. Externally, maybe, I'm at this point where people may not see my success, but internally, how much have I evolved, right? Right? What a beautiful life we live. And the last aspect of our 4-step plan is the change component, because once I'm aware, once I'm able to understand, I'm able to accept, I move towards change. And change is probably one of the most difficult for many people who've been victims of life. There are people who always remain victims of change. There are people who steer change, and there are people who anticipate change, right? So when it comes to this pattern of self-sabotage, we have to steer change.
Yes.
Because it's very important that I am in charge of this process. I can't allow somebody else or something else to work through it. And that's where the blame frame and the outcome frame or the problem focused, solution focused thinking comes in. Because, repeatedly people try to solve the problem from the same thinking patterns that created the problem, which is why they stay there. And it keeps them sort of limited. And so probably we could go through a couple of questions and see how it works. So I have a set of questions, and probably these will help everybody to sort of come or get in touch with the solution. So I probably would suggest that you work with something that you are struggling with, and I'll do the problem focused questions first. So the first question that I'll ask you,
wait, I have to now pick up. I know I have to pick up a problem. No, wait. What is the problem that I have?
Something that's self-sabotaging also would be great.
The thing is, I've solved that. The self-sabotaging process that was happening, I've solved it. The fitness. Let's have a pretend problem.
Yeah, that's fine.
We'll do a pretend problem.
We sort of move through it. Yeah.
Okay.
So the first question I'm asking you: what is wrong?
I've just been told I'm diabetic.
Okay. How does this limit you?
No, now I'm very scared. So now I can't have the kind of lifestyle I want. I can't go out and enjoy myself. I like going out with my friends and having a nice meal. I can't do it. So I'm very depressed about it.
Why do you have this problem? What caused it?
That is fate, I think. It's very unfair. This is what, I never did anything. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, and still I'm diabetic. So I think this is fate, and it's very unfair, and that is also what is depressing me.
What does this problem stop you from doing that you want to do?
See, that's what, if I weren't diabetic, then I would have probably run the marathon. But now I'm afraid that if I run the marathon, I might get hypoglycemia. So now I have to be very, very careful. It limits everything in my life. I cannot do anything because I have to now manage this. It's just stopped me from living.
Whose fault is it that you have this problem?
See, I am not to blame because I've had a good life. So it must be genes. I blame my family genes.
You and me, when we stay in problem focused, we're comedians, but anyway.
No, but you know what? I'm doing this because I have seen people talk like this.
Yeah.
Okay?
I know it's not you, that's why I'm laughing.
I've seen people talk like this.
அவங்களா தான் இருக்கும். No, I think we'll go back to whose
Yeah.
fault is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whose fault is it that you have this problem?
I think it is just it's a genetic problem. I think it runs in the family, and really I have done everything I can to control it, but I think it's very unfair that I've got it.
When was the worst time you experienced the problem or its effects?
Because I just had a recent conversation with the doctor, and the doctor told me all the things that I could not do, and I was supposed to go on a holiday with all my friends, and I had to call it off because it was just newly diagnosed and I didn't know how to do it.
So did this in any way help you feel better about the problem or give you a direction for change?
No, it just made me
And this
feel...
is typically,
Yeah, no, because when you ask me these questions and I give you these kind of answers, it keeps me within that loop of problem. And it makes
So
me
actually
feel
the loop is helplessness, hopelessness, sadness.
anger
Yes.
and resentment. That's
Yes.
what will happen.
Very much.
And believe me, even though I was acting, I felt I was getting into the role a little too much for my own comfort.
And that's really what happens with problems, Anu. It's
Yes.
very true that you brought this up.
Yeah.
Because we initially think we're only role playing, but believe
Yeah.
me, it's much, much deeper because
No.
the psyche picks up all
Yeah.
of this. So would you like to do the solution focused thought? Because then it becomes easier. So for the same thing, what do you want? How do you want to be?
So I want to have the freedom in life. I want to have time with my friends. I want to be able to lead a healthy, happy life.
When do you want this outcome?
Now, I want to do it starting now.
How will you know that you've achieved this outcome?
I will know when I'm doing the things that I want to do, and it will also reflect in the level
Which
of
is?
happiness that I have, which is
Yeah.
when I'm spending time with my friends, I'm doing the things that I love, and I'm healthy. I'm not having this fearful thing hanging over my head, regardless of what my health condition is. I know how to manage it, and I know how to lead a happy life with all the elements that I want in it.
When you get this desired outcome, what else will improve in your life?
So when I get that, it will give me a greater sense of self-confidence, because I have managed to get over what was actually a very fearful situation. Not only have I gotten over it, I have managed to get a handle on it, and I've managed to get back the happy elements in my life.
What resources do you already have available to you to reach the outcome?
So the doctors already told me what I need to do in order to manage my condition. I already know what I need to avoid. I know what I need to do in order to make sure that I can do some of the things in a controlled manner. For example, if diabetes is my condition, then I know that walking immediately, 20 minutes of gentle walking immediately after eating drops the blood sugar. So if I've had a heavy meal, I'll make sure that I walk. So I make sure I'm controlling this, and so in my hand is knowledge, and more importantly, the determination.
How can you use these resources?
Just call upon them. Just call upon them. Be aware that I have these resources with me. Be aware that I can put it to good use, and also stay curious, because I might find other resources that might boost my growth into the direction that I want to take.
How would you know you're getting your outcome? What would you be doing?
So if I would be with my friends, I'd be having a great time. I would be less worried about my health because I've already gotten a handle on it. I would have accepted that I have a health condition, but I will also accept that that doesn't stop me from having a happy life. And I know that that sense of contentment and peace is what will remind me that I have what I want.
What would your first step towards getting what you want be?
My first step would be to document what I need to do, and say that if this is the health condition, what are all the things that I need to do, and make it a habit. Once I've made it a habit, then when I do things that are not regular, like for example a holiday, these habits will follow me in the holiday. So I don't have to abandon the habits. I can continue the habits, enjoy the holiday. These habits again help me control this medical condition, and I have the best of both worlds.
How can you use what is limiting you now as a stepping stone to tell you what to do next?
So right now what is limiting me is this medical condition. And if I can understand how this medical condition is affecting me physically rather than how is it limiting my life, I will look at how it is limiting my life later. How is it affecting me? I will look at how it is affecting me, address that. The moment I can address that, then I know that I've got control over this. Then we will mitigate its effect on my life.
How can you use this problem as an opportunity to get your outcome?
I think if I had not had this medical condition, I may not have picked up some good habits. So I think it's in a way, it's a good thing that I have this. Secondly, because I picked up the good habits, I have stopped this condition on its tracks and stopped it from becoming worse. So I will use the knowledge that I have to prevent it having a bigger effect on my life.
Between the two sets of questions, how do you feel?
I feel like a rock star now, because now I'm like in control. I know what needs to be done, right?
Yes.
And you know what, while I was answering these questions, again it was role play, correct? But I felt such an energy rise within me. I felt so strong and I got more eloquent as I became happier with each question.
Yes, and that's how these questions have been carefully worded, because what they are doing is triggering out subconscious processes that help you look through new lens.
Yeah.
You know, because otherwise normally we tend to look through the same lens and we get stuck in the same place. And that's why probably, you know, the solution focused thought has many more questions, because I keep bringing you back to the loop and you're like, oh, did I answer this already? And they're not actually the same answers. They go back to different aspects. One is the thought aspect, one is the emotion aspect, and so I use this in therapy, which is why my therapeutic interventions are very quick, because what happens is I get them to reframe their thoughts, their actions, their emotions, their beliefs, all of just through questions, and I'll keep going in like a loop, you know, and they'll be wondering, but I answered it, and I'll say, but why don't you answer it one more time? And you know, they don't realize that subconsciously it's playing a huge impact on their brain.
No,
And
I'll
that's
tell
what
you
I want.
now. I'll tell you how I feel now. When I answered the first set of questions, I didn't feel great. When I answer the second set of questions, even though it's not a real situation, I feel great. Then I can only imagine when it is a real set of questions, how transformational this experience would be.
Yes. And this is the internal dialogue. So if I can sit down every day and just ask myself these questions for anything that's limiting me. It can be in a relationship, it can be with my work, it can be with my health. When I start doing this as my internal dialogue, it becomes almost meditative. Because what happens when you start saying, oh, this is possible, I can do this, I'm actually stepping out of that cocoon and allowing my wings to fly, sort of unfurl and fly. And that is really what this is able to push us towards. Okay, so this is what I have in terms of self-sabotage, but there will be resistance to change as well. And I think we need to be aware, because many of us will take the first two steps and then we realize that it's quite overwhelming. Change does come with a price, because it has to limit all your other versions which are limiting. And which is why many people find it very overwhelming. They're like, oh, if I give up this, will I also lose this? And they gauge a lot of loss that comes with change. However, that's not true, because unless you empty your palms of these little things that you have, you will not be able to open yourself to the treasures that you have inherently. And that is probably one of the ways in which you can push resistance to change out.
Yeah.
And if you want to add something there.
I do, because I think what I would like to sum up by saying we've looked at self-sabotaging behavior, we've admitted that it is insidious and that we may not be aware of it, therefore we should be looking at what are the triggers, what is causing it. But once we've identified the self-sabotaging behavior, it is not enough if we just stop that behavior. We need to replace it with another behavior which is more conducive, which is more helpful to us in being the best version of ourselves. And I'd like to finish off this episode with a beautiful statement I read somewhere. Self-defeating and self-sabotaging behavior are like false friends. When they are there, you think they're actually very good for you, but in the long run, they're actually very bad for you. So be aware of your false friends. And that's the end of our this episode of Keeping It Real. And as always, Aarti won't say bye, only
I'm
I'll
not
say
saying
bye.
Only Anu will say bye. I was actually gearing up with my hand and everything, and I'm like, today I'm going to like surprise Anu, and she just like sabotaged that.
Sabotage her.
Anyway.
Bye, everyone.
I'm not saying bye with my hands, but bye.
Okay,
everyone.
bye.
See you soon.
Bye.